Welcome back as we venture into part 2 of Cannibal Island, where we figure out what these people did to survive.
Historical Potatoes is where weird and obscure events in history come back to life.
So let's journey through time. So, just to recap, because it's been a week, um, we have these people, these undesirables, which I did my research, and the ones that were targeted during this time, there's several different people that Stalin targeted throughout history. Like in the beginning, it was political prisoners. Like that was the big one. And anyone that had, I mean, obviously there's political prisoners during this time as well, but like the major start of the Gulag was everyone that ran against him before he won. So during this time, he's already been, supreme dictator or whatever he called himself during this time. And they deemed this term, and where it's not everybody, but a good chunk of these people were deemed kulaks, which is not to be kind of mixed up with gulag. I mean, it kind of sounds the same. One has a K and one has a
Yeah,
G.
that sounds similar.
So, um, in 1929, they developed this term called the kulaks, which is, like how we talked about in the beginning, how, they had the farmers and all that stuff go out, and that's kind of where this kulak term came from. And what it was it was anyone that was used for hired labor, anyone that owned a mill, a creamery, or other processing equipment or complex machines. So anyone that owned that stuff, that physically owned it, and then anyone that rented out agricultural equipment or facilities. And then the last one, which is kind of where we're diving into on this branch, is anyone that was involved in trade, money lending, commercial brokerage, or any other non-labor income. So that's what all of these kulaks were derived from, and that's what the major piece of what these prisoners were. They're kulaks.
Hmm.
So it wasn't necessarily that they had a religious standpoint or that they, had a ethnic standpoint. It was just people that they decided shouldn't own their own things or shouldn't be making money.
Dang.
So I guess like the big stream and hit of the whole, anti-communism Russia type deal. So yeah, that's essentially what these prisoners were. We talked about the internal passports. Talked about being welcomed to the gulag and what the different types of gulags were. And then how they took, in just a matter of a few months, they took 86,000 prisoners and they dumped them along all these different gulags that weren't even built, weren't even ready to be built, weren't even taken care of. And so they were sent with no plan. And the one that we focused on was Tomsk, and how they didn't have room for them. They didn't know what to do. So when the river kind of thawed out, they're like, we're going to drop them off on the Zeno Island down Orb River, which is where Tomsk sat on, which would later be called Cannibal Island or Death Island. So I think that kind of summed up last week's episode. For people that didn't really listen, those were the cliff notes. If you accidentally found this episode before you found the first one, I would suggest you going back and kind of learning through this time. I go kind of into a deeper dive of what kind of the historical theater that was going on during that time, and what these different locations were. But last week I described what Nazino Island was. Just a barren, frozen wasteland in the middle of Siberia that had a river that flew around, or that flowed around it. And what I talked earlier, I don't know if I really iterated this, but there was no cities downstream of Nazino Island. So in order to get free and to get back to Tomsk, which would have been the nearest city, that's a 4-day boat ride, you'd have to swim upriver and try to make it to the land over there to then travel up to get back to Tomsk, which is obviously more than a 4-day walk, even for a healthy person. So that's where they're sitting at. So they arrive on the Zeno Island, and the guards throw them out there. No food, no shelter, no tools. They decided not to hand out the flour until day 4. They went 4 days without eating a single thing during that time. And so when they were going through, they decided to make up these campfires from the driftwood and just the small brush and whatnot that they found. It was so cold and it snowed so much that there was a good number of people that died from burning to death because that's how close they got to the fire in order to try to get some warmth. So that was kind of the first deaths that related to the island itself.
Wow.
I mean, you had the people that died on the journey through, but the first set of people that died came because they were burned. They were burned alive.
On a frozen island.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And then you had where there's 4 days without flour. And then there's these people that they call themselves the brigadiers. These brigadiers were criminals, were true criminals, were people that stole, that were in gangs, that were violent people. They convinced these guards who were living on the boat. They didn't come off onto the island. There was 50 guards, 4 officers. They lived on the boat. They told these officers, hey, we know that you guys don't want to come out here. We know that it's, there's not a lot of you. There's quite a bit of us. So let's take on the burden and we'll go ahead and take the flour from you and we'll distribute it out evenly and make sure everyone's taken care of. And so the guards were like, okay, we'll do that. We'll ration it out. We'll give it to you, trustworthy people that are not criminals. and then you'll distribute it out to the rest of the people. That's your job. We'll go ahead and do that. And so they did that. And what they did is they beat the shit out of people. They made the women, the small amount of women, do sexual favors in order to get this flour. They stole, anything that they could off of the men so that they would exchange it out for flour. And so when they did that, they got this flour and they're like, well, we can't eat it dry. So what we're going to do is we're going to get river water and we're going to mix it in and we're going to have like a paste and we're going to eat it that way. Well, then dysentery comes with that and almost the entire population gets sick from dysentery at that point from eating flour mixed with dirty river water.
Jeez.
And so you have all this shit going on. I don't know what the craziest part that I want to bring on next.
It's already getting
so the
wild,
guards,
so.
huh?
It's already on a wild stage, so.
Yeah. So the guards decided to live on the boat. They had all the alcohol and food that they needed on side that boat. And they decided that they needed sexual favors. And so they would give bread that they physically had for their rations. They would give it out to the women in exchange for sexual favors. And they also decided to start pulling gold teeth and watches and whatever they could off if there was any kind of gold or metal in their mouth, they would exchange that for the loaf of bread so that these prisoners could eat. So they're performing, dental actions and all that stuff that you would hear in Auschwitz. Like, that's what's crazy is that, like, Stalin was never, like, looked at by the United States, and it just blows me away that this shit was going on that is just as bad, not worse than Auschwitz. I think, the Holocaust was extremely worse, but there's shit that goes bad that's almost parallel to what happened to the Jews that we made such a big deal about, which rightfully so. But, like, why didn't we, do something and go after the Russians for what they were doing to their own people? I mean, because it was not nearly as bad as what happened in the Holocaust, but it was still shit that was, like, going on. That's like,
I think we needed Russia to take down Hitler, and that's kind of where we were stuck because World War II goes a lot differently if we don't have Russia.
Yeah. I mean, they helped us take Berlin and everything, but still, I mean, it's like, this is the shit. And this is happening in 1933, so this is even before, Hitler doesn't come to power till like 1937 or 1938. So, you know what I mean? Like, this shit is, and granted, it's not like social media in the world today, so it's not like we knew this was going on instantly. Right. I mean, like, hell, we didn't know that the internment camps were going on until we discovered them.
Yeah, right.
Took land and like, what the hell? You know what I mean? And we figured that out. So, I mean, I guess I could see that, but it just, like, it makes my stomach churn over some of the stories that I've read to figure this stuff out.
I bet.
And so all this shit that's going wrong with the brigadiers, the gold teeth being ripped out, the sexual favors, all this bad stuff is going on. The, the guards get drunk regularly, and they think that it's fun to just sit at the edge of the boat and start popping shots and killing people. So they're just sitting there and shooting them down. And then they tell prisoners to start make a run for it. That we'll let you free if you can just get across the river and make it through. We'll pretend that we never saw you. And as they start running, they start shooting at them and try to make it a game. It's like The Most Dangerous Game, if you ever read that book, where they're human hunting human. That's what it ended up being. The guards then went out to the island and started hunting people down, tell them to run, and they would sit there and track them and slaughter them. And they thought that was a fun little game that they could play. So then the guards started doing that to these prisoners because it was just absolute chaos. I mean, there's no agriculture, there's nothing to be done. The way they got shipped out to Nazino, all of the plans and all of what they were supposed to be doing was never with them. So essentially, it was just a crazy island. What is that? What's that movie? What's that book where you have the kids and they're in charge of the island and all that stuff and all that crazy shit happens?
Lord of the Flies.
Yeah, Lord of the Flies. Yeah, so it's like that aspect where there's nothing of purpose going on this island. There's no actual leadership, or there's no actual like point A to point B, getting my tasks done for the day to survive, to contribute to society. None of that shit's going on. So it's literally just a crazy fest of just craziness. So these guards just start popping shots, start, taking stuff out. And so we're still with the original 5,000 minus probably a lot less at that time. So May 21st, there is these doctors that show up, and they were guaranteed safety, but people kept looking at them like, hey, like, you look healthy type deal. And so a lot of them feared for their life. And when they got there, they saw bodies kind of everywhere. They counted what is reported. They counted 70 bodies by May 21st. So that is literally, 5 days after arrival. And of those 5 cases, they looked and they noticed signs of missing body parts, hearts, livers, muscles, and they came to the conclusion that cannibalism started to happen. So just within 5 days, so they didn't get fed for 4 days, flour. So on day 5, they got fed the flour, dysentery, all sorts of shit. So they were already killing off people to eat in just the first 5 days.
Wow.
Which is just fucking crazy. And so these doctors go back and they report to Moscow saying, hey, we have cannibals on this island, and that, we need to do something to like take care of them. The government's response was, well, if there's cannibals on the island, then they were destined to be cannibals. They did it because they wanted to. So we need to leave them on that island and leave them exactly where they're at. They don't deserve to come back to regular life because they're cannibals.
Wow.
We can't bring them back. They're cannibals. And so it was kind of like a lost hope for Cannibal Island, Nazino Island. And even 13 days after the second arrival, so May 27th, so 13 days after May 27th, Stalin decrees that kulaks should not be farming, and that the famine is getting even worse. So he decides to cut the program. So when they cut the program, they don't bring any more rations. So now the guards don't have rations, the people don't have rations, and it's just more of a downward spiral. And this is, kind of just less than 1 month in. All that goes on. And that's somewhat just like kind of living on the island, where the guards were just, fucking around. They got to do whatever they wanted. They got to, take care of, whatever they wanted to do. And or actually it was more than 13 days. I can't remember the exact. I guess I don't have that written down. I apologize. I thought I had that written down. So it was a little bit more than that, but they ceased operations. They ceased funding it. They ceased, giving rations and everything. But there was a time between that and actually the end of Nazino Island. So they lived there in this chaotic realm of um, just complete anarchy. I mean, it 100% was just anarchy where people were dying left and right. There was just murders going on, cannibalism going on, um, starvation, dysentery, whole 9 yards. So that was like what was life on Nazino. Do you have any questions of what I might have missed on?
I mean, it's absolute chaos. The fact that they were eating people so fast is just so crazy. I,
Well,
I
and that's
get
what.
I get
Oh, go ahead, sir.
starvation, but like and like that they didn't have anything to eat, but like that's just
But you
crazy.
think that this is so technically like it was like 5 days on the island, but it was like 15 days technically going from like prison to, and they were starved out when they were at Tom's. They were starved and they were
Yeah.
thirsted out. So these people are weak and they were. I mean, it's crazy. Yeah, 5 days you turn into a cannibal. If if anyone asks, it takes 5 days without food to start eating your own
It's just
technically.
that's just crazy to think about. Like it's wild.
And it could almost started instantly, but they didn't find it until the doctors got there on day 5.
Right.
So it could have been day 1, could have been day 2. Could have been those people were burnt and it's like, man, that smells good, and they ate them. You know what I mean?
That
It's
could
just
have been, yeah.
there's no exact count of like what actually happened on
Right.
like who died and how they died, and well, there's a few stories, but like from the exact point, yeah. So the start of the downcline of Nazino. So we're getting towards the end of the story. They cut the program, they cut everything out, and then finally 13 weeks later is where I got the 13 from, so I apologize. 13 weeks later, that's when they start pulling people off the island, and they did a count, and there's like a little under 2,000 that were still walking around, and out of that 2,000, only 250 of them could work, and they got sent to other gulags to go work and work out the rest of their life. And then there was 157, I believe, it's 157. Yeah, 157 stayed back on the island because they were too weak to even get up to get to the boats. So obviously, that they were pretty much rotted out and died. So essentially, a little less than 2,000 survived, and only technically 250 of them really went throughout and went through. And then there was an investigation that was done a few years later, before World War II, and the guards of the island went to prison for just 12 months. That was it for what they did, because there were some survivors that came out and said, hey, this is what was going
Jeez.
on. And they wanted to put a memorial on the island. So they kind of did a little bit of an investigation in 1939. And that's when these 50 guards and 4 officers went to jail for just 12 months. And then they went back to wherever they went. They didn't go to Gulag. They went
Right.
to jail. So it's not like they were like in an internment camp. They weren't working. They weren't,
Mm-hmm. Of
going through the same conditions
course not.
that they put those people through.
Right.
And it's just kind of nuts that happened. Um, and so, all that happened, and really, what I said earlier, nothing really came about until 1988, when an actual commission went to go look at stuff. And then that's when documents started coming through. And then nothing really came to the public's eyes until the middle of, the early 2000s, where they were like, hey, did you guys know this happened? So, it's crazy, it's nuts, that piece happened. And so, that was Nazino Island. That was just one aspect of what went through, where, over half the population died. Actually, yeah, quite a bit of the population died on just 13 weeks. That's one quarter, 3 months. Good chunk of the people died. Um, and to blow you away with another stat, So we were talking about March, right? We were talking about 1933. We were talking about from March to July is what the numbers that I stat you at. And if you remembered, what was it, 86,000 or right? Yeah,
Yeah.
86,000 people March to July. Tell me the number that you can think of from January to December from 1933 of the people that were taken to gulags for being
Um,
a kulak in a political, not real
this
crimes really. There's a few prisoners, but
before or after this?
so the whole 1933. So 86,000.
Okay,
Obviously,
okay,
the
okay.
86,000 is the baseline. Um,
Uh, 250,000.
367,457 people
That's a lot.
got sent to gulags in just 1933 alone.
Yeah.
And out of that, only 151,000 survived.
So half. Well,
Yeah,
less than half.
survived during that time.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
yeah, it's like 216,000 were dead.
survived is kind of a loose thing to say, you know. I mean,
Oh, and the people that no. So it's the people that were recorded. I apologize. According to Russian history, there were people that disappeared. So the people that they had records on were the 150,000, 151,000,
gotcha.
and then the rest were not found or not around and stuff. Dead.
Of course.
That were banished off to the gulags forever.
Yeah.
And so it's crazy. Like the Zeno Island, like it's just like when I was doing this dive on the history, and I was like, man, I kind of want to do like because I found like I wanted to find a niche, and I was like, man, the island thing. I think that'd be so cool to just like random little islands throughout. And then this one popped up, and I was like, this is a heavy first episode, and I apologize. I guess we're on episode 2, but it's very heavy.
Hmm.
Um, and we're about to go heavier, so I applaud all those who have made it through the podcast at this point. But I want to kind of bring up some of the stories that were told from Nazino Island, Cannibal Island. And they truly aren't for the faint of heart. So, I mean, like, if you had some stomach turns and stuff like that during this time, I would say I would just go ahead and end the podcast, and we appreciate you listening. And this might not be as dark as I think it fucked me up. But if it doesn't fuck you up, then I feel like I'm a wimp, and I apologize for that. But I'm just saying that it might not be as crazy, and I might be like leading it off as much as whatever. But I just want to go over a few of the stories that I heard. None of these can be backed by facts or anything like that. So this is just what was passed down and stuff like that. So again, with Russia, everything disappears. So all right, thank you for everyone that stayed. So I guess this is a bonus part of the episode. It's probably not as crazy, and that's why I feel like I'm building it up for no reason. I just don't want to get yelled at for people not knowing, and then this happening and stuff. So, I'm just gonna start out with like all the women they were raped over and over and over, and a lot of them were young women that some of them might not have been adults, and it's just that crazy part that really kind of messed me up a little bit. Just these people that haven't even lived their lives are sitting there getting abused around and whatnot. And so, that was the piece. And then there's this one guy that told the story. He said, I quickly found out how to survive and to survive good. I would go around and I would check everyone that was laying down or sleeping. And if they looked like they're about to die, I'd kind of nudge them around. I would make sure that they were still breathing. And if they didn't fight back with me or anything like that, I'd go ahead and start cutting out their calves and start cutting out their biceps to be able to eat them, because that was the best part. Now, if you killed someone that's been dead, that meat is disgusting. It's gross. So I always made sure that the people were still breathing and still alive, and that they were too weak to fight back. And I would just start cutting out their calves. I'd start cutting out their muscles. And eventually would take out their heart and stuff like that. But I'd go for all the muscles first, because the muscles were the best part. They were the tastiest. I'd take that and I would get a branch and I'd skewer the muscle, and I'd throw it over the fire, cook it a little bit, and I'd eat it up. And that's how I survived. That was one of the stories. That's one of the the first stories that sat there and he killed people that were alive. Like I can't do no Donner Party shit. I can't do none of that. You know, I would never be able to like eat people alive or eat people, period, whether they were alive or dead. But this guy like purposely,
He didn't even kill them. He harvested them
yeah, while
while
they
they
were
were
alive,
alive. While they were
he wanted to make sure they were
alive.
alive during the whole time that they were doing
While
it
they were
because that the
alive.
meat was better. So that was one piece. Um, and then there was one guy. He said, "I was no cannibal. I didn't eat meat. I ate the hearts and the livers only." And I felt like those are organs, those are not meat. So I made sure that when people were dead, that I would cut out their hearts and I would eat the hearts and I'd eat the liver. That's the only thing I wouldn't eat because I'm not a cannibal.
So
I don't
he
eat meat. I
considered flesh
Yeah, I don't
meat.
know. It was weird. So like that was one of the stories. He prided himself on not being a cannibal because he only eat hearts and livers. And so like that piece was very weird. And then in 1988, so we're gonna go forward before we hit the worst one. So 1988, they find this woman in this wheelchair, and they're talking about the memorial. So like the people that survived and stuff like that, they kind of gathered for this event type deal that made it through. And this lady was like, "Hey, so like not to be rude, but like what's up with your legs? Like I don't understand. Like your legs don't look right." And she said, "Well, while I was sleeping, a guy came in and cut out my calves and ate them, and I'm still alive. Like I survived, but they cut my calves, they cut my legs, and cut them all out so they could eat. And so I can't walk again. Those muscles didn't grow back and stuff like that." So this little old lady that's in a wheelchair that has these mangled up legs because, and I guess that's for survival, I guess the muscle's where it's at because there's a few other stories that are not interesting, but it's always about the muscle. They always like eat the muscles. No
Hmm.
fat. Well, I guess there was probably no fat to begin with, so never mind
Right.
because they're
Yeah.
all starving and whatnot. So the same woman that I spoke about earlier, this is what she witnessed. So this is what she told at this memorial. There's one of the girls, she was younger, that was always slept with one of the officers. So she would at night would go with the officer and would, have sex with him, all that stuff. And she would get fed. She was one of the prisoners that didn't have, wasn't starved, wasn't anything. Like she was healthy and everything because the officers kind of went around with her and and had their way with them, with her. This particular girl. Now this happened with a bunch. Um, and so after he was done with her, he brought her back to the island, and these prisoners saw her and thought, she looks good. She looks healthy. She looks fat. So they grabbed her, they wrestled her, they tied her up to a tree. They began cutting off her breast. Then they cut their muscles. Then they cut her thighs. Then they cut her fat. They cut everything out of her while she's still alive. And they cut everything up. They started cooking it. They started eating her. The guard comes back because I don't know if he forgot something. I can't remember what she said, but the guard comes back, finds her tied to this post, still breathing, screaming. And he goes and he runs to her and he undoes the rope and all that stuff. He takes her down. He rushes her to the doctor that's on board, and she's still alive, still breathing. And then I think just a few moments after they get to the boat and they start like trying to operate on her, she dies from bleeding out. But she was alive and she was conscious during that entire time. Where they were just cutting, like they were just like it was like a like those restaurants that have like the big old chunks of meat and they're sitting there just slicing it off. I know that's a bad thing, but that's just how it was. They tied her to this fucking post and they just started carving her up and just cooking her. They would cut off a piece, they'd throw it on the fire, eat it, and someone else would come up and they just start cutting while she was alive, screaming. I mean, like she said, the lady said that it was just like blood curdling screams that they liked killing the women because they felt like they had more meat on them than the men did, but they kind of kept some for sexual favors and whatnot. But this one girl was so well taken care of by the officer that they decided to cut her up because she seemed like she was a lot of food. And they cut her up and they ate her while she was still alive and bleeding out, and journeyed back to the boat and survived. I know, like, and I feel like these stories were not as crazy as I was trying to lead them on to be, but
Pretty
it fucked
crazy.
me up when I was reading them. I might not be telling the story right or anything, but
Oh,
it
they're
it
pretty
fucked me
crazy.
up.
They're pretty messed up. And like,
And
go ahead.
and these are just the stories that like we know about. And there's probably even worse things and stuff like that happened that we have no idea. And there's one, okay, so this isn't a bad story, but there's this one guy that survived that made it through the thing. He got a raft. He made it past the boats and everything like that, made it to the island or made it to the land, got caught by other police officers, got sent to another gulag, and he worked for the rest of his life there, and then ended up, coming back to like the memorial and stuff like that. And he was the one that actually wrote the book about Zeno Island and stuff like that, and like what all happened, and quite a bit of the accounts. Um, but yeah, he was able to escape on a raft and made it through. And then he got captured again and got sent to another gulag. But he was one of the, I think he was the only person that made it out through like escaping. There was like hundreds of bodies that kept getting washed up on shore because they would make these rafts out of driftwood and then hit a rock or break something, and then they'd get slammed back into the island, and they would, couldn't, there was no one that could make it pass through. So yeah, I mean, those were like the most, yeah, fucked up stories. I don't know if they were as bad as I'm thinking them
They're
to be,
pretty
but they
bad. They're pretty bad.
they
Because
fucked up as I read them.
the fact that like someone was harvested while alive, like we don't
But
even
that
do
was like
that.
the key thing
No,
that
no, no,
happened to
no.
all these people.
Like we don't even do that to animals. We
Yeah, it's
kill
very true.
animals and harvest their bodies. We don't harvest them while they're alive. We don't even do that to animals. So like psychologically, like that's so messed up. It's not even funny. Like
Right,
it's just beyond. But like I mean, obviously, like this is just how things were there, and like that's just what life was. I guess it's just. But then at that point, it's like how messed up is your brain at that point? Like you can't. Even if you did survive, like what's the point? Like you're gonna go somewhere else, and like you're gonna be messed up the rest of your life. The things
right,
you've seen, the things you've done, like even the guy that wrote the book or the lady that survived, like the things they had to do to survive, like they're not going to tell you about those things.
right.
They're going to tell
They
you about
told
the
about
things
other
other
stuff
people
that
did,
happened. Yeah,
or maybe it's something somebody else did that they did to survive. But like mentally, like there's no point. I
right.
guess just to survive at that point because it's just suffering.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like the
God.
PTSD and everything that you would go through is so like that's what like man when I was writing this and I was going through it, I was like I had to take a few breaks because like in like I there's some stuff that I left out just for like time's sake and whatnot, but like it was
You said
it
it got dark, and I didn't think it was going to get that dark. It got pretty dang dark.
yeah, it
So
was. I mean, and I'm so sorry for everyone that's still around. I'm sorry that this is the first episode or the first series, and we went real dark with it. I mean, when Forrest goes on his, it's gonna be a nice little
Woo.
light on. I can't wait for your story, and we're not gonna,
Oh
we're not
man.
gonna spoilers or anything like that. But I'm excited for yours, and it's gonna. This is where mine's at. This is where yours at. I mean, it's
We're on a historical roller coaster, ladies and gentlemen.
exactly. That's what we live for is this historical roller coaster we call life. But I hope as we go into this, mine are gonna kind of be not nearly as dark, but more serious in that aspect. And then we're gonna look forward to Force's because his are gonna be like happy and odd and strange, and they're gonna be the cool stuff that we haven't heard about. Um, I so look forward to hearing what you come up with on. And I know some of your titles. And I
Yeah.
just know that mine are. I mean, we are going to be on a roller coaster. I mean, it's
Yeah.
going to be like we're going to have a serious week, and then we're going to have a like an
Right.
uplifting week, and then a serious week. And I think it's a good combination. And
Yeah.
I'm hoping that everyone sticks around and we keep going with this because I think this is going to be a fun ride. And it truly is.
Yeah.
But
I,
yeah,
Whew.
I think that wraps it up. I'm sorry for the hot and heavy episode, but I think that wraps it up for this week.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
So
we'll come back next week with something a little lighter, hopefully.
yeah, we're gonna be better at this. We're gonna get better. But
All right.
all right, thank you so much.